m'écoutez.
Bonjour, vous m'entendez? Bonjour, pour information, cette conférence, elle va être donnée en anglais. Donc je vais continuer en anglais. So we're welcoming here today Marianna Rapsomaniki,
Thank you.
said it right, for a conference about keeping science human in the age of AI, which is a subject that is really interesting and really of actuality. So thank you for being here. For information, if you want to ask questions throughout the conference, just make a sign or interrupt. You can do so, or at the end. Si vous voulez poser des questions en français, je serai à côté et je pourrai faire la traduction. Il n'y a aucun souci. Voilà. Bonne conférence.
Thank you. I hope you can all hear me. Okay, great. So let's get started. So it's really great to be here. I'm really thankful for the invitation. It's an amazing event. It's also a pleasure to be here with my family. I know my son has had a lot of fun already with the games. So let's get started. So today we talk about AI. What is AI? How do we do science in the era of AI? And what does it mean to keep science human in the era of AI? So before we dive into the specifics, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I am originally Greek. I was born in Corfu. It is as beautiful as you see here in the picture. Then I studied as a computer scientist in another city in Greece called Patras. 2011 brought me to Switzerland for my PhD, again in computational biology, as we call it, or I would say in the field that merges computer science and biology and medicine. Then I spent 8 years as a researcher in an industrial research lab that does a lot of AI-based research at IBM in Zurich. And just last year, we took the decision to move to the French part of the country. We came to Lausanne, and I've been working as an assistant professor in the University of Lausanne, also affiliated with the Lausanne University Hospital, so the CHUV. So where exactly do I work? We are part of the Biomedical Data Science Center. This is a relatively recent center that belongs to the CHUV and is also affiliated with the Faculty of Biology and Medicine at UNIL. And it's a rather large unit. We're more actually than you see here in the picture. So we are around 60 people right now. We are a collection of data scientists, PhD students, interns, and scientists overall. And what we care about is doing research, supporting in the research the different divisions of the CHUV, the different research units of the CHUV, where they collect a lot of patient data. So our mandate is to do research on this data and be able to give really informed insights back to the patient so as to improve their care, to improve research, and to improve new therapies. And my group in particular is a collection of really talented people that you see here. So we focus on AI. Our topic is called AI for biomedicine. This is our what we work on. So I'll tell you a little bit what we mean by AI for biomedicine. So it's essentially very simple. It's a collection of data, combination of data with different models, right? So what we mean when we say data, I guess you would think things like numbers in a spreadsheet, right? Or maybe other different types of measurements. Very often we mean things that are able to quantify all different aspects of life. Very often we do that via images. So we take images and we quantify the DNA, for example, the mRNA, the proteins, what we see in living systems. We have now a number of technologies that we can actually quantify all these things. So what we do in my field is we combine this data, whether it's images or it's any other type of data, and we combine it with models. So when we say models, again, what we mean is an abstraction of the physical world. So you can think of it as a toy model of a molecule, right? It's not a real molecule, of course. It does not contain all the complexities of a real molecule. It's just a collection of sticks and balls, but it's a very good abstraction. It gives us an idea of the overall structure of that molecule. So that's exactly what we try to do. We try to take the data, model them with the right level of abstraction so that we can understand how living systems work better. Now, particularly in my field, we focus on cancer, right? We focus on oncology, and specifically, maybe you've heard of precision oncology. So what we have in this case, for example, could be images like this, where we could profile. So what you see here is an image of an ovarian carcinoma. So what you see with different colors are the different cells within this carcinoma, and also specifically the genes that these cells express within this carcinoma. So what you are able to capture is this very, very detailed, very beautiful picture of what happens within an individual tumor, right? So you want to know what genes are expressing what type of, what cells are expressing what type of genes, how do they form together little ecosystems, how do they interact? And of course, that's very important. And for that, we also need models, right? So in our case, our models, again, are abstractions of this very, very complex ecosystem that you see here. And what they actually are, and you just see a very, very small part of this huge tumor here as a schematic, we are able to identify all these different cells, characterize them. What cells are they? Are they cells of the immune system? Are they cancer cells? Are there blood vessels coming in? And so on. And then we build models. So the same way as I told you before about the molecule, about having sticks and balls connecting them, right? Here we have, again, little balls indicating the different cells, and now the sticks are the connections between the cells. So you could think of it as a social network of cells, how these cells interact within the tumor, right? So I guess what you already appreciate from this really beautiful image is actually that reality is extremely complex, as I said before. So you see all sorts of different little ecosystems forming. So more cells, more green cells here, for example, little structures here. So what we call in my field is that there's a lot of morphological, because of the different shapes, but also molecular, because of the different colors, complexity. And this is something that's very, very important to understand if we really want to treat the disease. Now, if we zoom in even one of these little cells, the complexity is even more enormous, because even a cell on its own is yet another very complex ecosystem. So within each cell, and this is what I'm showing you here is the nucleus inside, here is the nuclear membrane, and here is just a channel that allows molecules to go in and out the nucleus. And what you already see here is a gazillion of different molecules with different colors. You see the DNA, for example, over here, proteins transcribing genes on the DNA. So you could imagine this is a very, and this is a very realistic picture, by the way. It's a very complex choreography between all these different species, all these different molecules inside our nuclei happening all the time as we speak, right? Now, what's important in cancer is to understand that this complexity, or what we call this heterogeneity, that starts from a single cell, that tells us how these cells form ecosystems, is very important at the patient level, because each patient's tumor is unique, is heterogeneous. So if we think at a whole population, we could not expect that all these patients take the same treatment and respond in exactly the same way in the same treatment, because each cancer is essentially a different disease. So in order to create precise treatments for each patient, we need to be able to model this heterogeneity. So this could be a very big opportunity, actually, for new treatments. So what we really believe, and not just in my lab, but also across the spectrum in cancer research right now, is that by understanding all these very complex interactions, we could, for example, devise better immunotherapies. Immunotherapy is a big revolution in cancer treatment. It is really very, very effective in a lot of different tumor types, but we don't know in which cases it works, and we don't know why it fails when it does fail. So how do we select patients for immunotherapy? Is it because their tumor ecosystems are organized in a different way? Can we help their immune cells penetrate better and kill the tumor cells? For all these things, we need to do this profiling. And at the same time, something that's very important is what we call drug resistance. So the vast majority of cancer deaths is not because of the primary tumor, it's because of relapse. So very often, patients initially respond, and then they relapse, or maybe even worse, they form distant metastases. So this is what we want to be able to understand a bit better. Why do certain cell populations die and some others relapse? What makes them become resistant to the treatment? Is it related to where they are in the tumor, and can we block them? And could we even manage to turn cancer, even if we don't heal it completely, but could we turn it into a chronic disease so that the patient lives with it, but these populations stay in place, they don't grow uncontrollably, and of course the patient can have a very high quality of life. Now, to do that, in the past 10 years, we've seen a very big revolution. And this revolution is essentially that we have now new weapons to understand, and we have new ways that we could actually turn new technologies to our favor. So we have ways that we can actually measure individual cells, individual molecules within the cells, right? And we could also, as we say, perturb them. So we could also go in the cell, change different things, like delete certain genes or give them certain drugs, and see what happens. So all this is because of really big inventions in technological, in biology, right? One very proudly also a Nobel Prize awarded to Dubochet at UNIL, a UNIL professor, right, for cryo-EM. So all these new technologies allow us to have all this amazing new data that we could profile each last individual cell within the tumors in different patients over time, over different treatments, and hopefully understand a bit better this complexity, right? That at the same time, what we also have is really amazing new inventions in the area of AI. So I'm sure you've all heard about neural networks, very recently also awarded a Nobel Prize in Physics for the seminal inventions in neural networks. But we also have things like transformers that maybe you've heard of, or foundation models, or multimodal models, things that allow us to write text and get images and combine all these things all together. And today, people even talk about what we call agentic AI, which I'll mention in a while. So the idea is, can actually these new AI models, these new inventions in AI, allow us to model and understand cancer even better? I'll give you a few very successful examples that have revolutionized the field in the last years. Again, another Nobel Prize, a very, I would say, surprising Nobel Prize last year already, 2024, in chemistry for AlphaFold, which was the AI model that was able to solve one of the biggest problems in biology, which is how can we predict the three-dimensional structure of a molecule, of a protein molecule, if we only know its sequence, its amino acid sequence. So this is very, very important because we care about how these molecules dock and interact with other smaller molecules, right? So now AlphaFold has made it possible to do it for practically any hypothetical even protein. And at the same time, the other half of this Nobel Prize went to David Becker for new inventions in what we call de novo design. So the ability to design from scratch completely new proteins that don't exist, right? So this was really a revolution in our field. And something else that is also quite revolutionary right now is in the field of pathology. So usually pathologists will take like a biopsy, is what you see here. So now we have these systems that are basically like GPT, but using images. And as you see here, the pathologist just takes crops of this tumor, asks the AI, what am I looking at? And it's already telling it, what you're looking at is the tongue. Here is what I see. You should highlight this, you know. What's the degree, asks the pathologist. And the AI says, this is the degree of differentiation. That's why I know that this is important, and so on. So we are in a situation where we actually have a lot of like these AI chatbots already coming into clinical practice, okay? Which is very, very exciting, but also could be a little bit of scary. So we'll talk about that as well. So all these things that I told you are also the area that my group focuses on. And I'll mention just very briefly a few studies that we just very recently published and we're working on right now. One problem that we wanted to solve in the group was the following. When a tumor gets resected from a patient, usually there is a very long process that happens in the lab where it gets, as we say, sectioned. All these different tumor sections get stained, as we say, with different dyes. This allows the pathologists or the clinicians to understand exactly what cells are present. And then also with other types of dyes that tell them what proteins are present in this specific tumor. And that's very important because this is exactly how treatment decisions are made every day for every cancer type in the clinic. However, this takes occasionally days. Very often we don't have enough tumor to do all these experiments. So what we asked in the group is, could we devise a model that actually learns how to generate hypothetical experiments without ever having to do this? Could we, only using this image, that's very important and very easy and cheap to get, generate images that look like that, right? And I'll give you one example to make it very clear. Maybe you've seen in the past, or maybe you've played with some apps where you give like a, as we call a source image, like a picture of poppies in a field, and then it paints it with different painting styles from different painters, right? You could imagine other situations where you give a portrait of yourself and it tells you that's how you're going to look in 10 years or when you're old, or that's how you looked as a teenager and so on, right? All these models use generative AI in the backbone, right? So what they learn is how can I preserve the content of this image and transfer on top of it the style of different painters. So we got really inspired by this and we said, could we actually train a model that learns the content of a tumor and stains it, hypothetically, with all the different painting styles that now are the different experiments, the different dyes. So we published this method last year already, and it created a lot of buzz. There is a nice article also written about it. But essentially what the model does is within minutes allows you to get these hypothetical stains, which can go back to the pathologist and get evaluated together with the initial one. And you might wonder, okay, why would I do that if I can do the real experiment? Well, in many cases, you don't have enough tumor to do the real experiment. The only thing you can do is generate this hypothesis, right, through these generative models. Another area that we are focusing on is modeling CAR T-cell therapy. So CAR T-cell therapy is a type of immunotherapy that's very revolutionary. So what happens is that a patient that has cancer gets their blood collected, the T cells, so cells of the immune system, get extracted. They get engineered with this receptor that you see here, which is this chimeric antigen receptor, this molecule that you see over here, and then they're given back to the patient. And hopefully, what happens in many cases is that now these engineered CAR T cells are able to better kill the cancer cells. They become more potent. Now, one problem in this approach is that many times it doesn't work. Again, we don't know why it doesn't work. Very often it has very important side effects. There are safety issues. They have different, as we say, off-target toxicities, right? And how can we actually design better receptors is a very big area of research. Now, the problem now is the following. These receptors have all these different building blocks that are very important for their function. So if you have this way to put like 3 building blocks together, in reality, we have a huge collection of building blocks that we can put here. So very, very easily, you see, it becomes astronomical. There are hundreds of thousands of combinations of how to construct this. And this is yet another application where AI can be very useful. You can never test 100,000 combinations in the lab. It's not humanly possible. But what you could actually do is train a machine learning model like we did, that you would give the initial cancer cells, the initial CAR T cells, and it would tell you, given these different hypothetical designs, what would have happened if I were able to do it in the lab. So again, it's a situation where we can use generative AI to create hypothetical experiments. So I guess with everything I've told you, you understand that AI is really slowly making its way through science, through scientific discovery. And I think to better understand that, we really have to go back to the basis of what we mean when we say scientific discovery. And at the heart of scientific discovery is the scientific method, has always been and will always be, right? So we observe data, we observe a phenomenon, we make hypotheses, we do experiments, we analyze the data, we interpret the findings, and then we make a conclusion, okay? This is how we've always done science. Now, AI is very good here. It can collect a lot of observations and it can massively mine them. It can massively find patterns in these observations, much better than we can. It is very good here because it could also maybe suggest some hypotheses to test. It could tell you, this experiment out of the 100,000 looks very promising. Maybe you should test it in the lab. Also, it's very good at telling you how you should do it, automating the experimental process. Definitely very good at analyzing the data. All the heavy computations you can do in the lab, you can automate them much, much better and much faster. But I would argue that actually what makes science human is that we're much better in deciding what matters out of all these possible patterns. Maybe we have the ability to ask the right questions. then definitely we can contextualize the interpretation much better. So we could say, okay, this seems to be the finding, and because I know these other things that I know, this means that, right? So it could help you go to a conclusion in a much more informed way than just simply going through a lot of results, right? But what is also important is that we can assess the implications of what we found. Okay, we can assess the societal implications or what else it could mean for science much better than any automated way. And of course, at the same time, there are a lot of risks, and I guess a lot of things you might have been thinking about during the talk. But of course, you know, how are we sure these systems are reliable? Can we trust them, right? How can we sure our data is secure? How can we sure the data doesn't get leaked, especially when we deal with big companies that are mining this data for us, right? Who controls these systems? Who is responsible if something happens and it's a big mistake, right? So let's say a medical decision is made based on an AI. Who is to blame? The AI cannot be blamed, right? Is it the person who built the AI? Is it the person who trusted the AI? So who is responsible? So how transparent are these systems? Can we really go in and say, this is exactly why they took this decision? Because many of these systems are what we call black boxes, and sometimes we don't know why they tell you this patient has cancer or doesn't have cancer, right? Do they care about our well-being or not, or that they're very, very unbiased? And of course, how can we sure that they avoid what we call bias? So all these models are trained based on human data. Very often the way that we collect this data is very biased. So if I collect a lot of dermatology images in Europe, of course I'm going to have fewer images of people with dark skin, which will not be applicable in a country where the majority of the population has darker melanin-rich skin, right? So can I trust it, or is my model very biased? Because this is the only thing it has seen. And of course, how can we make sure that all these are addressed before we go in and we implement these systems in the clinics? And something that's very interesting right now, and it has created a lot of buzz in my field, is what we call agentic AI. So what is agentic AI? You are a human scientist, and you interact with an LLM, like ChatGPT, for example, and the LLM is autonomous. So it has the power to autonomously make decisions, interact with other LLMs, with other tools, and so on. These are the agents, right? And then give you back an answer to your requests. So all these things, all these specialized agents are working in the back, are interacting with each other. You don't really know how this is happening, right? So this, again, is creating a lot of buzz. And right now, everyone wants to work with AI agents. AI agents are everywhere, right? And I'll give you one example of a very, very recent news. So there is this non-profit company called Future House, who their whole mandate is to automate scientific discovery using AI agents. And one of the very recent announcements that they made, and this is the CEO, Sam Rodriguez, is that they found a new discovery based on their, what they call it AI scientists. So their AI scientists generated the hypothesis, designed the experiments, analyzed the data, and even made the figures for the paper, right? So you could imagine this created a lot of buzz in the field. And I'm definitely not an expert in the specific disease that they were studying, which is dry AMD, a major cause of blindness. So I couldn't tell you if what their agent found is correct or not correct, but I know that a lot of experts have debated whether this is really novel, whether they trust it or not. And another company also working a lot on agentic AI is Okin, who just launched their K-Navigator. So of course, agentic AI is here to stay, right? But I think there's still a lot of steps to, a lot of thought to be given to how much we could trust it. Another study that came out very recently, and again made a big buzz in the community, is called exactly like this, Your Brain on ChatGPT. So this is an MIT study. I'm linking it down here. And essentially what the researchers did is that they assigned the participants of the study in 3 groups. One used only LLMs, the other one used a search engine, like Google, and the third one, they only used their brains. And they asked them to do certain tasks, like write an essay, solve some puzzles, and so on. And also what they did in another session is that they switched them. The people that had the LLM went back to just using the brain, and the people that were using the brain, they started using the LLM. So what they found, which is also quite exciting, is that they have very different neural connectivities, the three groups with themselves. And actually, they saw different different neural networks activated in the brain. And they could essentially see that the brain-only group had the strongest, widest ranging networks, and the worst was the LLM one, the weakest one. So is AI making us more stupid, right? If we depend a lot on GPT, do we even lose the ability to think as well as we would without it? And I'll bring you one example of how I understand that, which is navigation. Because if you take my phone away, I will get lost in 3 minutes. And I used to be better in navigation, right? I used to be better in finding my way in a city when I was young and there was still not so, everyone was connected with a phone. So my ability to orient got worse with technology. So is the same thing happening to our ability to think and to think scientifically? Okay, but now I would say leaving these potential dangers and this pessimistic thinking behind, I think we really have to focus on what I think really makes science human, right? Independently of what tool we use, I think what really makes it human is our intuition, our creativity, our curiosity, how persistent we are when we really want to find the answer to a question, our collaborative spirit, our teamwork, working with others that give us ideas, our ingenuity when we have a problem that we really have to solve. The way that I see it, this is what really makes science human. And I'll bring you 2 examples of 2 personal heroes of mine, of the science. One is Alan Turing. Maybe some of you have heard him, maybe some of you have not heard him. So Alan Turing was an English mathematician, a computer scientist, you name it. There was nothing that this man was not able to do. He even went and made amazing discoveries in biology. And he conceptualized the Turing machine. So the Turing machine was an abstract idea of what he called universal computing machine. And he imagined that at a time that there were no computers, right? He completely conceptualized the idea of being able to do computation and solve an algorithm at a time that we didn't have either. So he completely imagined in his own mind a new field, and that's why people call him the father of AI. He's the founder of modern computer science. A very sad story is that Turing actually, during the Second World War, made, I would say, important inventions that led to the machine that broke the German Enigma code. So he broke the German cryptography. His work potentially saved the lives of millions of people. But he was actually never recognized for that. He was treated very poorly for his sexual preferences from his own country. He was chemically castrated because he was a homosexual. And there's a very nice movie about that called The Imitation Game, which explains the story, right? So I would say, but still his legacy lives on. People still to this day appreciate his creativity, his ingenuity, his scientific spirit. And another person that I really admire is Margaret Dayhoff, who is not the most famous female scientist, but many argue that she is the mother of modern computational biology. So Dayhoff was a chemist and had the intuition to see that maybe if we collect protein sequences and put them together, we can learn a lot of things about how proteins function. This was already back in the day, I think already in the 50s. She was a mother of 2 daughters, and she was many years at home as a housewife when she returned and decided to work on this problem. And this is exactly the whole idea behind AlphaFold. The fact that if we collect all these protein sequences and align them, we can learn a lot of things about the functions of these proteins. But she had it in her mind as an idea way before it was a reality. And now it's just for us standard practice. And as I told you way in the beginning, science thrives in teams. I am really, really happy to be working with these wonderful, very, very creative people every day. I'm even more happy to see how they work with each other, how they help each other, how what they know comes together and leads to new discoveries, right? And how they can brainstorm and troubleshoot as a team. And this is something that brings me a lot of joy and hopefully brings every scientist a lot of joy. And also to say that what is very important working with younger people, and as I 7 years ago, I became a mom to this little guy sitting over there who doesn't speak English, so he has no idea what I'm saying. But he did approve the use of that image here, right? So everyone that is a parent or works with kids knows that kids are the ultimate scientists. We can learn a lot of things from them. They always ask the craziest questions. They have the wildest imagination. They're very curious. They know how to form hypotheses. They even try to test them scientifically, experimentally. They don't care if they make a mistake. They just do it for the fun of it, right? They're very playful and they're very open-minded. So I would argue that we could all use these qualities to keep science human, and there's no debate that AI is here to stay, is here to change our lives. I think we can still do great things as humanity if we nurture curiosity, if we empower the new generation of scientists, and that's how I think we could keep science profoundly human. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Marianna, for this presentation.
Thank you.
Of course, I wrote down a few questions while you were talking. I'm not going to ask all of them.
Okay.
We talked in the end about using AI as a tool to observe and analyze data in a project driven by human hypotheses and questions. And I was wondering in what extent could AI flip this around and bring new questions to research, crazy ones that adult scientists may never have thought of.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that is already happening with these agentic systems. So what many of these systems do is that they read a lot of papers. Read is not the right word. They ingest a lot of papers from the literature. They make connections, and they try to find if there are missing links to say possibly, you haven't thought of that idea, right? Or maybe this is worth checking. I think there's a lot of worth to that. Of course, I think that many times, humans tend to hyper-focus on one specific protein, one specific molecule, one specific disease, and sometimes we miss the big picture. Even you could think of it for doctors, right? If they're hyper-specialized, they might lose the holistic idea of how the patient is doing, right? So the same is true in science. So from that point of view, I think there's a lot of, I do think agentic AI could have amazing applications in science, because no one can read that many papers, right? So to create new hypotheses for us to test. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So would we think that AI could maybe foster more relationships between different fields of science, maybe humanities, biology, medicine, economics? Could it maybe help this interdisciplinarity?
That's a very good question. So I would say yes and no. I mean, it again depends on what data would be fed into this AI, right? So if I would say the human that interacts with the AI focuses a lot on that, potentially yes. But like from personal experience, where we've seen completely new fields of science get invented, very often it's because two scientists are sitting together and having dinner, or they go to a conference and they go for a hike, and they just start brainstorming, and a crazy idea gets born, and this leads to even some years in the future to a completely new field, right? So I think what is some obvious connections maybe, but what is really wild and left to the creativity of like a crazy person coming up with some connection, I think this will remain, at least for the foreseeable future, fundamentally human.
Thank you very much. And the last question I'll ask is about the future scientists, because we have kids around today in the festival, and maybe they're going to become scientists in 10, 15 years. In what regard do you think that AI and the evolution of AI is going to modify the training of these new scientists?
Okay, that is something that I ask myself on a daily basis, because my students are becoming scientists at a time where they have an incredible amount of tools around them, right? To automate a lot of the things that I used to do by hand, or when I tell them these things, they always think that I'm very old. But it's actually really true, right? I mean, I didn't have GPT when I was writing my PhD thesis, or when I was studying for exams. So I've seen two things. I've seen on the one hand people using tools like ChatGPT very creatively. So, for example, they are studying for a certain exam or for a certain topic, and they use it as a tutor. Right? So they say, okay, ask me a lot of questions about this. So then they interact with it to see how well do they know, because it's just posing them questions. I think that is like a great case, right? Or something that's also important is that people that are not native English speakers or French speakers, in my case, you could actually use it to improve your language skills. You write something and then you ask, okay, where is the mistake in my sentence? Please fix it, which is also, when we write scientific papers, is also very important. Where I think we shouldn't be using it, and I have seen this happen quite a lot, is to say, okay, analyze the data, analyze my data. I did this experiment, analyze my data, right? And it just would give them an answer. Very, very often it's wrong. Very often. I mean, sometimes there are also some quite fun experiments that people do online with really obvious questions that they ask different LLMs, and they get the answer completely wrong. So I would never trust a piece of code that an LLM wrote without checking myself that it's doing what it should be doing, right? So I think yes to automation, but for obvious and easy to assess things, still keeping our thought process intact, not forgetting that we are the ones that need to be posing the questions, that we are the ones that need to be interpreting the results, not blindly trust this to any AI system. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there questions in the audience? Est-ce que quelqu'un a une question?
Thank you very much for this fascinating talk.
Thank you.
I had one question more about definition, because we talk about algorithm, AI, and all these kind of things. Why do we talk about AI now? Because algorithm, they exist like for a few years now. So what is the difference?
Okay, very good question. So I would say the word AI is a big buzzword, right? Everyone uses it right now, but without talking for half an hour, I'll just explain a little bit the timeline. So, an algorithm is just a process of how you're doing something, right? So do this first, do that after, and so on. Everything that can be automated as a process of steps is an algorithm, right? Now, in the very early days, the very first AI systems were what we called rule-based systems. So someone would literally write, if this happens, then do this, and so on. And they used symbolic language. So this is when the term artificial intelligence was invented, right? After that came what we call machine learning, which is a more scientific term for AI, actually. So machine learning is learning on vast amounts of data. I just give you huge amounts of data, and you use algorithms that learn from the data, associations, and so on, right? Now, when new systems like ChatGPT and so on became a thing, people started using AI again, because it was the first time that they were talking about actually sentient systems that could be, how should I tell you, that they could think on their own without without needing to be told the rule, or without needing a specific data set. They could reason on their own, right? So people started using AI again as a term, and I would say before that, there was a very long period of what we called AI winter, right? So before the emergence of LLMs, people spoke a lot about AI winter, because for many years it was not really like a crazy invention. Another thing that changed was GPUs, the machines that allow us to do these heavy computations. So we call it AI now because they might be able to reason on their own and be artificially intelligent. When we talk about any algorithm, I think it's more accurate to say machine learning, because you're just training machines to learn from data, right? So all these are like intermixed terms. AI is the more popular term that people kind of use for everything right now. I hope I did not confuse you more. But yeah. Sure.
I didn't quite understood what it was agentic.
Yes. So when we talk about agentic, we mean agents, right? don't imagine little robots, but like little systems that, for example, let's say you have a ChatGPT that understands text. You have another one that is very good with images. You have, or I give you the example of oncology, right? One reads the report, the clinical report. The other one looks at the image. The other one looks at the molecular information, the mutations of the patient. All these are specialized little chatbots or little agents. That's just a term. And when you put them all together and they interact autonomously, this is called agentic AI. It's a simplification of what I'm saying, but more or less is how people have been thinking about that. So automating a process where the key thing is that all this happens autonomously and they take the decisions. You're in the driver's seat, but you don't tell them exactly what to do. Sure.
Hello, thank you. Do you think that our current ethical systems to try to align AI might be unfit to maintain the biological capacities to against AI, let's say? So maybe that, ethics of care or things like this that we try to ascribe AI to might not be able to compete with as we saw your brain on ChatGPT, right? That's the question. That maybe we need to change our ethical systems in order to make sure that we co-evolve with AI so that we remain relevant, let's say.
I think what you just asked is literally the most important question we should be asking ourselves as a society. Absolutely. I think many people don't realize how close we are to even big societal disruption with a lot of the new technologies that come. There is also a very big division between US and Europe. I mean, the political landscape is very complex. We need 5 hours for this discussion, but I guess you all read the news, right? You all see, new US administration really backed up by a lot of the big tech companies that invest very heavily in AI. It's not random. It's not just because everyone got so interested in AI, right? I mean, how this will change society is a huge political discussion. It's not just a scientific discussion. I would say in Europe, I wouldn't necessarily say I feel more safe, because I think if it changes for everyone. But at the same time, I think we pay a bit more attention into things like ethics, regulation, and so on. I hope we continue to do it even more. And what I find very scary is the part that a lot of the data that all these systems are using are just public data that they're using without consent from anyone, right? So there is a lot of articles on that, how all these big systems like ChatGPT are just using, text, artists, works of art from several people with no approvals, with, again, no copyright, that are copyrighted, right? And they're just using it like that. So I think there is a lot of ethical concerns. And at the same time, how are we under threat because of superintelligence as a species is also something that people worry about. And I also worry about that, right? So could these systems go rogue and one day decide, no, I have my own intelligence, I know how to construct a chemical weapon, I might as well do it, because, whatever. I'm not saying this is going to happen, this is more science fiction, but it's less science fiction today than it was 10 years ago. So I don't have an answer, but I ask myself the question almost every day. Yeah. Thank you.
Then thank you very much, Marianna, for this presentation.
Thank you all for the questions. Thank you.